Welcome, everybody. It's an honor and a privilege to welcome you to this Divest-Invest Movement Leaders Media Conference happening today on September 15th, 2021, following the groundbreaking announcement that Harvard has divested from fossil fuels. My name is Richard Brooks. I'm the Climate Finance Director with Stand..earth, an environmental organization working in Canada and the US and around the world to advance climate justice and environmental protection. And we're also coordinators of the Climate Safe Pensions Network. The last time I had the privilege of facilitating a media conference like this was nearly a year ago when New York State announced that it was going to be divesting its $245 billion pension fund from risky fossil fuel companies and decarbonizing by its entire portfolio by 2040. And I definitely see a direct connection between that groundbreaking announcement and what we are going to be celebrating today. And it's an incredible achievement that we are going to be talking about, and I'm hoping that everybody can stick around for it. I'm going to just take 1 minute to review what the format is for today, so everybody's super clear on how we're going to proceed. We have two portions to this virtual event. The first is the media portion, which will feature 6 speakers, many of whom are on your screen right now, who will speak for about 4 minutes each. We will then open up the Q&A for media, and we'll be prioritizing media during that Q&A. We will then follow that with 3 further Divest-Invest movement speakers and open up the celebration for all of the attendees as well. The chat currently is disabled right now for attendees, for viewers, but we will be opening that up during the second portion of the event, so you can share celebratory and congratulatory messages in the chat. So if you want to prep those now, feel free to do so. During the first portion of the event, we will be putting some links into the chat to really great media articles and tweets and social media. So keep an eye on the chat as the speakers are moving through their presentations. For journalists who are on the call, when we get to the Q&A section of the event, if you have a question, you can indicate that you would like to ask a question through 3 different ways. You can click on the raise hand button, which should be at the bottom of your screen. You can also click on the Q&A button, which is right next to the raise hand button. And if you are on one of those old school landline devices, you can click or hit star or *9, and you will get into the queue. I would invite journalists right now to rename themselves in Zoom. So you are identifying yourselves as a journalist with your media outlet. That will help us prioritize you for the Q&A session. And I think that's it in terms of the process and format. I will remind folks of this when we get to the Q&A on how to ask questions when we get to that. Before I introduce our first speaker, I just want to say that there is no doubt that this is a big moment in the continuing momentum of the divestment movement. There are now more than 1,300 institutions with assets over $14.5 trillion who have committed to divest in some form from fossil fuels. And I want to say also that there are more to come. There's going to be a big announcement at the end of October that I hope you will all stay tuned for, where we will hear more about the incredible momentum of this movement. I also want to say thank you. Thank you to Harvard. Thank you to Harvard for taking just so darn long to make this announcement, because as a result of this long-running campaign, the Divest Harvard campaign has been an incredible training ground for climate justice activists for nearly a decade. If Harvard had moved quickly in the first year of the campaign, we might not have seen so many students, so many faculty, and so many alumni joining and training up in the fossil fuel and climate justice movement. And as you will see from our speakers today, dozens, if not hundreds of these folks have gone on to make incredible contributions and continue to make incredible contributions in the fight against climate change outside of Harvard. So thank you, Harvard, for taking so long. Thank you for finally making the right move in terms of moving on divestment of your incredibly large endowment. and I will now turn to our first speaker. Our first speaker is no stranger to anybody on this call. Bill McKibben is the co-founder of 350.org. He's a founder of the fossil fuel divestment movement writ large. He's a prolific author. He is now co-leading a new organization called The Third Act. He's also my mentor, my co-conspirator, and my brother in peace. Over to you. Welcome, Bill McKibben.
Richard, thank you so much, and thank you for all your work. This is a signal day. I want to make just a few quick points. The first is about perseverance. Places like Harvard count on the fact that people are going to come for 4 years and go, and that's all they're going to have to worry about. I've had the privilege of watching people pass this torch year after year after year. I've been at it so long that I remember when the distinguished senator from Maine's lucky 13th district was a high school student who wrote to tell me that she'd gotten into Harvard. And I wrote right back to say, Chloe, you are going to cause them a lot of trouble, and that's just what we need. And I've gotten to watch that process all the way through to Ilana and her remarkable colleagues who finished this game and brought it home in some ways at the halftime of Harvard and Yale a couple of years ago with a brilliant, brilliant piece of organizing. And in between, there have been tens of thousands of alumni, faculty, and students who have taken part. Not only that, and this is important, everybody who has been engaged in all the other thousands of divestment campaigns around the world, successful or unsuccessful, have played a huge role in bringing this general pressure to bear. Second, this is an enormous moment. It stands with the moments in the divestment campaign when the Rockefellers divested, the first oil fortune in the world, when the country of Ireland divested, when New York City and then New York State divested, when Oxford and Cambridge and the University of California system divested, all the way back to the moment at the very beginning when Unity College in Maine, with an endowment of $8 million, became the first educational institution to stand up and do the right thing. Third thing, this is far from over, and I am so glad that we have people from places like Princeton with us today. Harvard has left those guys, all the rest of people, no place to hide. It's entirely clear at this point that the smart money has fled the fossil fuel industry, and that we need everybody out. And that goes to the fourth and most important point. The point of divestment all along has been to weaken politically and financially the industry that has for 30 years lied and schemed and lobbied and worked in every way to maintain its business model intact, even at the cost of breaking the planet. This day comes too late to save the people who died in Hurricane Ida, or to save the forests of the West that have gone up in the last 6 months, or frankly, to save the people who will perish in the years ahead, some of them anyway. But not too late to be a huge help in doing what we still can, which is holding the increase in temperature of this planet Earth as low as possible. By turning up the heat on Harvard and everywhere else, the people on this call have done a magnificent job of helping turn down the heat on the Earth. And that is what we desperately need. And I am so grateful to everybody on this call and all the people that they stand for in the long history of this fight and in the fights that we have to come in front of us. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Bill, for your great words and your continuing work in this movement space. More to come for sure. I now want to turn it over to Ilana Cohen. Ilana is an organizer with the Fossil Fuel Divest Harvard campaign. They are a freelance climate journalist and currently a junior at Harvard studying philosophy and social studies. They're originally from Brooklyn, New York. Welcome, Ilana.
Thank you. It is such an incredible privilege to be here with everyone today, particularly seeing so many faces who have inspired me and my peers over these past few years. But I just want to start off by really emphasizing 3 key points about why this victory is so big. First, it is a true testament to people power, to the power of student and community organizing. For nearly a decade, students, faculty, alumni, staff, community members sustained pressure on a completely intransigent administration. And today we're really seeing the payoff. But the payoff also goes beyond having this incredible, powerful signal sent from the world's richest university to asset managers and institutions that they have to get in line with a just transition. The power also lies in the community that we've built, which is a lasting one, and one that is fundamentally fighting for a much broader vision than just divesting Harvard, and even broader than divesting all of our institutions. What we're fighting for at the end of the day is climate justice and endowment justice, a totally different way of conceiving of these big pools of money that should reflect the interests and the needs of our community members, and also reflect the interests and the needs of those who are impacted by their investments. Supporting divestment at Harvard is powerful because of the signal it sends. It's powerful because of its reflection of the community that was built in the process of divesting it. And also because through all of this organizing, folks have had to go up against the very same entrenched power structures that sustain the fossil fuel industry and the extractive economy that industry is more broadly representative of, and the one we're trying to dismantle. I know Anna's going to be speaking later, so I don't want to take too much time on this, but I really want to also stress how thankful I am for all of the folks who made this win possible. Just to name a few of the individuals and organizations who are not on the screen right now. UN Foundation founder Tim Wirth, former Harvard overseer Kat Taylor, former SEC Commissioner Beavis Longstreth, Divest-Ed, College Climate Coalition, the prison and Israeli occupation divestment campaigns on Harvard's campus and the Grad Student Union, and of course, Climate Defense Project, the attorneys who helped Harvard students craft the legal complaint filed with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office that was so central in this victory. And it's important to emphasize that because complaint filing of this nature is a tool that so many other campaigns can use right now. And it's one of the two highlights of our campaign that I really want to pick out on this call. So earlier this year, we filed a complaint effectively arguing that Harvard's fossil fuel investments aren't just immoral and financially reckless, they're also illegal under state law. And it's under a specific state law that's in 49 states. So the argument that we use is applicable virtually across the entire country to hold universities to account. It's arguing that they need to align their financial practices with their nonprofit missions of furthering higher education. There's simply no way for a university to legitimately claim that it can invest in the fossil fuel industry and also care about its students' futures, or care about preparing them to be leaders in broader community, or care about tackling climate change. So that's something I really want to pick out. I also want to just reflect for a moment on the power of the Harvard Yale game protest that happened in 2019. I'm not sure how many folks here saw that, but a bunch of students and alumni allies stormed the field of the Harvard Yale football game at halftime and really helped catalyze an unprecedented national moment of public consciousness around divestment, and one I think we're still benefiting from today. The fact that so many people, hundreds of people, poured down from the stands in this incredible and completely unexpected fashion during that protest really testified to just how much the political moment has changed in favor of divestment and in favor of a just transition. People are waking up to the reality that we simply can't afford to accept the status quo. We can't just sit there and enjoy our football games without realizing that serious political action has to be taken, because our lives, our livelihoods, our communities, our planet, and all of our futures are on the line right now. I want to end by just sharing a bit of the vision that our campaign Fossil Fuel Divest Harvard has going forward. It may seem like, okay, we divested Harvard, so what comes next? And yeah, that's a really great and important question, because there's so many campaigns, divestment campaigns and other climate justice campaigns that are asking these same questions as we're seeing victories towards achieving a just transition. So we're going to be focusing on holding Harvard accountable, of course, for phasing out its remaining indirect investments in fossil fuels. But we're also going to be really working to further this larger vision of just and sustainable reinvestment, to think about how Harvard's endowment and endowments more broadly, or pools of money that are meant to be responsible to community members, could be invested in fundamentally different ways to scale up the kind of just regenerative economy we know needs to take the place of the fossil fuel industry and other extractive and exploitative industries like it. We're also going to be focusing on highlighting the pervasive role of fossil fuel money and fossil fuel industry influence on our campus and across higher academia, because that's another way in which our most prestigious institutions continue to lend their social licenses to this industry. And as Bill said before, divestment is really about stripping the industry of its social license to operate, weakening its political power. And we can't do that until we're ensuring that our institutions are severing all ties with the industry, until they're not afraid to say the word divestment and to put aside false notions of shareholder engagement with the industry that we know will never work. So that's a really exciting vision for the future, and when I'm hopeful a lot of the folks here are going to join us in carrying forward. I'll end there.
Thanks, Ilana, for your wise words and giving us that glimpse into where you're going next with the campaign. I want to now turn it over to Hannah Reynolds. Hannah Reynolds is the co-coordinator of the Divest Princeton campaign. They are a senior at Princeton studying anthropology, focused on law, policy, economics, and environmental studies. And they are originally from the Finger Lakes area of upstate New York. Over to you, Hannah.
Thank you. And thank you, Ilana, for that great discussion of your campaign. Hi, everyone. I wanted to start by thanking you all for being here this morning. And I especially want to offer a huge congratulations to the organizers over at Harvard for running such an incredible divestment campaign and accomplishing this amazing victory for the climate movement. We'll see if you can keep up the win streak when you play Princeton in football next month. But I have to say, I've never seen Princeton students so excited about good news over in Cambridge until now. We're also incredibly overjoyed at this momentous accomplishment in organizing at Harvard. Your hard work made this happen. I guess I should introduce myself. My name is Hannah Reynolds. I'm the co-coordinator of Divest Princeton and have also done work with Divest New York and New Jersey on state divestment campaigns in the past. I'm currently a senior at Princeton, which is probably a huge relief to the administration at this point. But with the good news at Harvard, I'm optimistic that maybe I'll get to attend a fossil fuel-free university for at least a semester before I graduate. At present, however, Princeton remains invested in the fossil fuel industry. Last June, in response to our divestment proposal, Princeton announced a vague and unsubstantiated plans to partially dissociate from coal and tar sand companies with no timeline whatsoever. Now, if you know anything about fossil fuel investments, you'll know that investing in coal and tar sands is just about the worst financial decision you could make, even worse than holding stocks in oil and gas at this point. And the word dissociate is a uniquely Princeton term coined in the era of divestment from South African apartheid, meant to be a hurdle for divestment campaigns like ours. For Princeton to divest from a company, that company had to be so egregious that Princeton would also have to dissociate and sever all ties to that company. One of the arguments that Princeton now uses against divestment from fossil fuels is that we still drive gas-powered cars. It's pretty clear to me right now that that is not going to be the case in 10 years from now. As Princeton professor David Wilkove said earlier this year, to connect divestment with dissociation is inappropriate in this case. The university can recognize that climate change is an existential threat and can say that given the way technology currently functions, we need to use fossil fuels, but we do not need to use our financial resources to support and promote companies that produce these fossil fuels. Even worse, much of Princeton's supposedly paramount research in energy and the environment is funded by ExxonMobil and BP, which raises serious questions about conflict of interest and the integrity of Princeton's research. Both of these companies have deceived the public, spread climate disinformation, and slowed climate action while simultaneously polluting our planet for profit. So really, Princeton's plans to partially divest are nothing more than a half-hearted attempt to present Princeton as a leader on climate while continuing to stonewall student and alumni activists. Princeton remains culpable in the climate crisis, continually investing in and partnering with an industry that is destroying the future of its students. Harvard's the wealthiest university in the world with an endowment of $42 billion. So what it does matters financially and symbolically. Harvard's divestment is an incredible opportunity. With each successive win in this movement, and especially when it's the most well-known school in the country divesting, the legitimacy and financial well-being of fossil fuel companies declines, while the moral, social, and fiscal incentive and imperative to divest only grows. Harvard's divestment paves the way for not only divestment campaigns at other universities like Princeton to succeed, but also locally, regionally, and nationally. I really can't express how happy I am for all of the Divest Harvard organizers. You did what I've been dreaming of for years now. You successfully made the argument that private elite educational institutions like Princeton and Harvard with billion-dollar endowments have a role to play in revoking the social license of an industry so overwhelmingly responsible for the climate crisis. This isn't a political thing, it's just common sense at this point. Harvard might call itself a leader for finally divesting from fossil fuels, but I know, and everyone on this call knows, that you are the leaders in this situation, the people who forced their hands until finally the university had no choice but to divest. And for that hard work, I'm so grateful. President Eisgruber and Princeton trustees, if you're listening, I hope you know that all eyes are on you now, especially now that Harvard's divested. Earlier this month, Princeton was hit by a tornado and flash flooding due to Hurricane Ida, a tropical storm associated with, you guessed it, climate change. Your students took shelter from the tornado in basements that were flooding with water, while you continued to ignore Princeton's role in the climate crisis we're facing. We're feeling these effects in New Jersey now, central New Jersey. Who would have thought that even 5 years ago? You have the power to do something to make Princeton a leader on climate change. Please, we're begging you, follow Harvard's lead and ensure that Princeton's on the right side of history. Divest from fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thanks, Hannah. Irrefutable arguments there. And I'm hoping that the leaders at Princeton are definitely listening into this. And if they're not, then we will make sure that they hear this message loud and clear. I am now honored to introduce to you one of the co-founders of Fossil Fuel Divest Harvard and currently serving as the youngest state senator in Maine. They are a leader of the groundbreaking Maine divestment legislation, the first state government to do so in North America. Welcome to State Senator Chloe Maximum.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's such an honor to be here today. I feel so inspired by the words of Bill, Ilana, and Hannah. I don't think I can quite match them, but I will do my best to add some thoughts here. I was one of the co-founders of Divest Harvard back in 2012. So it's been a long 9 years of watching an institution that is forever attached to my name continually fail. It has succeeded at last, but the main point that I would like to emphasize today is that Harvard's success is not leadership. It is following in the leadership of its students and its entire community that has voiced for so many years what is right and just. Harvard has finally stepped onto the right side of history with all of Fossil Fuel Divest Harvard and all of its contingents. I found myself in a really interesting position this year. As has been mentioned, I serve in the Maine State Senate. I've been this is my third year in the legislature. And I was a co-sponsor on a bill, LD 99, that would divest Maine's pension fund from fossil fuels. The bill was sponsored by another amazing young legislator, Representative Maggie O'Neill, to give credit where credit is due. But in this moment, the bill was up for a vote in the Senate. So I was there. I wasn't really expecting much debate, but there is another Harvard alum in the Senate, and he pressed his button and stood up to speak. And he was making the case against the bill, saying that we should not vote for divestment because we need to be engaging with fossil fuel companies, that the only way that we're going to make any progress is through shareholder engagement. And I got really incensed. All of my instincts from organizing on Divest Harvard and hearing President Drew Faust say that to my face so many different times, it kicked in. I didn't have anything prepared, but I pressed my button and I stood up and said, that's not right. You can't use shareholder engagement to fundamentally change a business's way of being. The bill did pass, which was very exciting, and Maine's pension fund is now in the process of being divested from fossil fuels. So that is very exciting. But in that moment, I couldn't help but think of all of the ways that Divest Harvard has impacted my life and impacted the world in general, and especially the divestment movement at large. This is a movement that has built so much momentum to last over a decade. That is absolutely incredible. And it's those movements that are the power that we use to hold politics accountable. one of the biggest lessons that I learned from Divest Harvard is that we need politics. As much as we don't want to talk about it, as much as we don't want to run for office or go lobby in state houses or in Congress, we need good policy. And that means that we need good policymakers. And it's the movements that have been born out of divestment that are going to end up and already are creating the kind of policy that we need to move towards a just and stable future. And so I think that that's something that I keep in mind every single day as I serve in Augusta, as I work on policy. That has come directly from my experience with Divest Harvard, being so inspired by all of the student organizers that have come after me, that the movement has been kept alive and gotten bolder and stronger. And it's just been such an amazing experience to watch it thrive. And especially, as Ilana said, watching the Harvard-Yale game. Back in my day, we could not have done that. And so they pushed it to a level where it was the political moment. So I'm just so grateful for all of the work that has happened. And I'm grateful that, we can make some small steps in the political world as well towards a better future.
Thank you so much, Senator. And I might disagree with you about the small steps in the political realm. Certainly the Maine divestment legislation is incredibly significant, and we'll feel the ripples of that big achievement as well in the months and years to come. I now want to introduce to you Tomas Insula, who's the executive director of the Laudato Si movement, formerly known as the Global Catholic Climate Movement. He is a graduate from the Harvard Kennedy School, where he co-founded the Climate Justice Caucus in support of Divest Harvard. Welcome, Tomas.
Thank you, Richard, and dear friends. What a joy and joining from Rome, from the other side of the ocean. It's truly such a joy to celebrate with you all this historic win. In the first place, congrats to everyone. All the ones who just spoke, and everyone else that will speak later, and everyone else that has participated in one way or another to make this gigantic win possible. So, and I feel truly humbled to be here sharing a few words, because I feel I did so little to contribute to this win, honestly. I was just one of the many hundreds, maybe thousands. I don't know, Chloe, how many students have participated in the Divest Harvard campaign throughout this decade. But yeah, I have great memories. Actually, I have my T-shirt. You might remember Harvard Heat Week 2015, I think was this one. Great memories from those days, and so many other lovely, engaging in civil disobedience at the Harvard Yard, sleeping in the doorsteps of President Faust's office. Was just a remarkable climate activism school. So, and yes, indeed, from the Kennedy School, from our little Climate Justice Caucus, they were proud to contribute a little bit. Something was particularly fun was a divestment debate we hosted, and the professor from the business school, Professor Rebecca Henderson, was supposed to be anti-divestment proponent, kind of changed sides during the debate. It's such an impossible argument to sustain, the one against divestment. So anyways, great memories. And I should mention one of the great lessons from this year, is the most remarkable one, I think, was from Professor Jenny Mansbridge, a brilliant political scientist at the Kennedy School. I was bugging Jenny to get faculty support for, I can't remember which of the divestment initiatives. And Jenny replied the following, something like, social movements are multi-headed creatures. We don't need all heads or all branches of the movement to be doing everything together at the same time, although that's good at times. It's fine for the movement having various heads doing various things simultaneously, complementing each other, building pressure from multiple angles. That was a very polite way of saying, no, thank you, Tomas. You students go ahead with your thing, and faculty will do this other thing. But truly is a remarkable insight, a brilliant realization, I think. So, which is why, truly, just to call out the many movement heads or branches that made this victory possible. So faculty, obviously, we'll hear later from Joyce Chaplin, Harvard staff, Harvard alumni, so many allies, attorneys were mentioned, and other groups, Better Future Project and 350, and so many more. There were so many heads of the movement tackling the administration from multiple angles. And I think this image of the multi-headed creature is helpful to think of the divestment movement at large and the climate justice movement at large. We truly need to be aware of that, the need for that diversity and this tackling together from multiple angles. And I'd say this statement from Harvard truly serves as a tipping point. And this multi-headed creature, this multi-headed movement is just getting bigger and bigger. So from this side of the ocean in Rome, I can share that the faith head of the divestment movement is getting increasingly bigger. Faith institutions at large and Catholic institutions in particular, which is where I'm more heavily focused, are divesting at a massive scale, stressing the moral imperative of fossil fuel divestment. So over 250 Catholic institutions have already divested, several Catholic universities driven by student activism. And all this activism has followed in the Catholic community in particular, but has been followed by a remarkable statement from the Vatican that has turned divestment into a mainstream thing. The Vatican issued some groundbreaking environmental guidelines last year for the global church to follow, and they included a very strong recommendation to divest from fossil fuels. And we're seeing just amazing action, especially in the South. Faith institutions in the South are leading the way, saying enough is enough. We might be celebrating today this Harvard victory, but this immoral industry is pressing ahead, drilling more and more wells, building more and more mines, more and more pipelines, while the world burns. So our goal is to build in this Harvard win and urgently, let's say, harness dozens of new institutions to make commitments by COP26 in less than 2 months. So yeah, keeping fossil fuels is a moral imperative. Keeping fossil fuels in the ground is a moral imperative. So let's build on this win and let's turn this moral imperative into a political norm. So thank you and congrats, everybody.
Thank you so much, Tomas. Definitely a multi-headed team effort to achieve what has been achieved this week. And definitely the impacts of this are being felt globally, but more work to be done. Yeah, it's a perfect segue for me to introduce our next speaker, who is going to speak about the financial impacts on the fossil fuel industry of this announcement. Tomas Insula is the director of the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. He's the former first deputy controller of the New York State and its pension fund, where he oversaw one of the largest state pension funds in the country. Welcome, Tom.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Richard, and thanks to everyone on the panel for the hard work and success. What is this? Okay, the computer's talking to me. Sorry. Anyway, I'm the director of finance for a nonprofit organization that does this work around the world. We're in about 30 countries, and this move by Harvard is probably one of the most significant in the world. Harvard's decision to divest is really rooted in the fiduciary duty of the fund to take into interests the entire Harvard community. That's what the fiduciary function really is. But there's a financial responsibility here, and they also are taking into account a fundamental financial fact. And that fact is that the fossil fuel industry is in a state of decline, and the outlook of it is grim. In 1980, the fossil fuel sector commanded 28% of the Standard & Poor's 500 indexes. Today, it constitutes 2.4% of the Standard & Poor's index, and that's at the bottom of the Standard & Poor's 500 index, whereas it used to be at the top. There's been many, many changes. There are pronouncements of the imminent recovery of the oil and gas industry. Oil prices are up 40% this year. But Harvard's decision tells us that they are long-term investors, And there's no long-term investor who can ignore any longer the fall from grace, if you will, of the oil and gas industry. This year, we've seen large pension funds, one I used to manage, New York State Common Retirement Fund, divest. We've seen large international agencies like the International Energy Agency speak to the point that no new oil fields should be developed. BlackRock, who is probably one of the world's biggest investors, have counseled the city of New York that those funds that have divested have seen either neutral or positive results. There have been no negative financial returns. The Harvard endowment represents about 37% of the annual revenue of the school. It's the single largest source. Harvard's decision recognizes that the best way to protect that investment, the best way to achieve solid financial returns, is to divest from fossil fuels. The management of the risk from climate change is really too much to ask the trustees of Harvard to bear any longer. The size of the fossil fuel investment from a financial point of view is too small, the returns too low, and the risks of continually holding it are much too high. What I think the other thing from a financial perspective that we're looking at is that large institutions like Harvard are now leading the way on divestment. BlackRock's recent report on New York City noted that the divestment movement was started, as Bill pointed out, by small religious organizations, nonprofit groups, and a little college in Maine called Unity College. Harvard's decision is an example of what is now a market demand. The institutional investors want their money managers to devise fossil-free strategies and to do so in a manner that will meet financial targets. It's been done, it can be done, and increasingly it will be done. Money managers who do not offer portfolios that manage the energy transition are likely to flounder, and Harvard's leadership role here has lowered the risk for other universities' philanthropies to move forward with divestment. On a final note, Moody's Investor Services recently released an analysis that made clear that when a government, even a mature government like the United States, is racked by social inequality, racism, and other contentious issues, that how the authorities respond to that matters. Governance matters to our economy and our society. Harvard's decision comes after a contentious process between students, supporters of divestment, and the university administration. The university's decision upholds the Harvard community's adherence to the highest standards of public discourse, and that includes respect for the voices of the student body. This too is fundamental. Thanks.
Thank you, Tom, for that commentary and that analysis. And thank you, of course, for your ongoing great work in this space. It's truly instrumental to some of the success that we're seeing. We're now going to turn it over to media to ask some questions. I'll remind folks that we have 3 more speakers after this Q&A. So please stick around. As well, we will be opening up the chat to all attendees to share celebratory and congratulatory messages. So if you want to prep those now, you're welcome to. For media, if you would like to ask a question, there are 3 ways that you can identify yourselves. You can raise your hand. There's a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Press that button and one of the moderators will turn on your audio or video. The other way is to use the Q&A function to, again, identify yourself as a media outlet. And finally, if you are on a telephone, and I think there's at least one person on the telephone, maybe a journalist, you can press *9 or *9 and you'll get in the queue as well. So let's see who's on the line who wants to ask a question, a journalist, and we will go from there. So I see that Kevin Sumachi has indicated they are in the queue. So maybe one of the moderators could turn on Kevin's audio and video so they can ask their question. There we go.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for holding this press conference and for taking the time. My name is Kevin Simauchi with the Harvard Crimson, and my question would be for Ilana. So will you change the organization name? Will you change the organization from Fossil Fuel Divest Harvard? Do you see a necessity for that, given that the goal has been accomplished? And my second question for you guys is, what will happen with the legal complaint with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office? Thank you.
Okay, fabulous questions. First question, that's going to be an organizational decision. At the moment, we're sticking with Fossil Divest Harvard because it's a powerful name. It's a name built to community around, and also the fight for divestment is fundamentally not over. Again, divestment is about stripping the political power of the fossil fuel industry. Harvard is still terrified to do that, right? Like they're still hedging around using the language of divestment. They still have these indirect investments with no clear timeline for getting rid of them. The net zero by 2050 pledge is still a complete mess. And we haven't seen the administration be willing to seriously grapple with the ills of the fossil fuel industry. Its continued spread of misinformation, its continued lobbying against climate policy, its continued pollution of primarily communities of color and low wealth communities. That is an important part of diminishing the power of the industry, ensuring that our institutions are not complicit in its continued existence by lending a social license to that. So our work on the divestment front continues, but also, of course, we see reinvestment as a necessary complement to divestment, and that's always been integral to Fossil Fuel Divest Harvard's mission. So that in that respect, not much has changed. We just have like a really exciting new opportunity and window to move forward with thinking more radically about how the endowment could be a tool for scaling up a just and regenerative economy. On the second question, so the legal complaint is now really in the hands of our Massachusetts State Attorney General. We've put forward what we believe is an incredibly compelling argument for why Harvard's fossil fuel investments, which it still has, especially through these indirect investments where there's no clear timeline or rapid timeline to phase them out, are illegal. And this is an argument that we also believe is more broadly applicable to other institutions that have nonprofit status. So we're waiting to see what the AG does with this complaint. And I think it's also really important to uplift the Boston College complaint that is also filed with the Massachusetts Attorney General's office. So our complaint was clearly central, which you can see from just looking at Harvard President Larry Bacco's email, in getting this divestment win. And we're still waiting to see what happens over at Boston College, where divestment has not happened. And the university has not recognized a very clear moral, financial, and, as we argue, legal mandate to divest. So you should definitely look into what's happening with that complaint as well moving forward.
Thank you.
Great. Any follow-up questions, Kevin? No. Okay. So then we were going to turn it over to Jordan Woolman with Politico. He has a question in the Q&A. Maybe we can turn on Jordan's audio and video. He can pose the question, and then I will designate somebody to take an answer. Nope, that's Jordan Dale, different Jordan. This is Jordan Woolman, W-O-L-M-A-N. There we go. Over to you, Jordan.
Hi. Yes, thanks so much again for having this discussion. My question is, there's been some mention from several of the speakers about, there's more to come. And I'm just wondering if there's any specifics there. So if there's any specific institutions that you're closely watching who have, you've seen activism on their campuses, maybe you've seen some movement from, or some interest from the board of trustees, just any kind of specific institutions that you're watching most closely to see if they'll commit to fully divesting from fossil fuels. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jordan, for that question. I think we have a few panelists who are going to jump in with answers from different perspectives. So we'll start off with Hannah, and then we'll move over to Bill.
Awesome. Yeah, I think for me, I'm a little biased because I'm leading the Divest Princeton campaign, but we've seen a lot of movement, or like historic movement, from them this spring, where they committed to at least partially divesting. And I think that really followed the model that Harvard had done previously, where they kind of tried to slyly act like they were making a difference and actually divesting, but not really doing anything, and kind of allowing them to just kind of stay in the background, but still not be seen as this like completely like ignorant institution, when it comes to divestment. But I think now, especially with Harvard's model, I think that Princeton will be more inclined. I think Yale will also be more inclined. I remember Bill saying to me when the Harvard news came out that probably the two saddest people in the world were Princeton and Yale's presidents. So that's kind of where I'm at. Yeah.
Thanks, Hannah. Over to you, Bill.
Yes, just to follow up on what Hannah's saying, Harvard exists in several different spheres, and so it'll have influence in all of those. Yes, there's this group of elite, very elite institutions with enormous endowments, and Yale and Princeton and are some of the obvious ones. Some of the Ivy Leagues have already divested, Brown, Cornell, others. But places like Yale and Princeton and Harvard remind us that the plural of privilege is establishment. These are the definition of establishment. And if there's any excuse, and there really isn't much, for the endless perks and privileges we give the establishment, it's that when we're in a time of crisis, they're supposed to deliver. These guys have been shamefully slow to do so, but this will help goad them along. Harvard also exists as a preeminent educational institution in Massachusetts, our most educationally minded state. Across Massachusetts, people at colleges and universities have divested from one end to the other. And beginning with the great work that Varshini Prakash did at UMass, and continuing all across the Pioneer Valley and school after school after school. But as people were just pointing out, one of the most notable exceptions is just a few miles away up on the heights at Boston College, where there's absolutely no excuse whatsoever for BC to remain invested in fossil fuels. Harvard answers to no higher authority, but BC is a Jesuit institution, and the Jesuit Pope has told them in no uncertain terms to get their act together. So Eagles, let's go. The third thing I would say is that within the educational realm, there are also all kinds of other groups that are paying real attention to this. There's a big movement now to get divestment at TIAA-CREF, the enormous pension fund that all of us professors pay into. And it's high time that it took the lead from the faculty and alumni and students at all these institutions who are pointing the way forward.
Thanks, Bill. I'll just jump in as well to just say, there's a lot of momentum in this space outside of university and college campuses as well. We are seeing the ramping up of pension divestment campaigns right across North America. A lot of activity also in Europe, with a lot of pension funds moving to rid their portfolios of investments in coal, oil, and gas. Just here in the United States, there are very active campaigns in Colorado, California, San Mateo County, New Jersey, New York, Maryland, Chicago, San Francisco, Montgomery County in Maryland, Oregon, Minnesota, and many of these state pension campaigns and city pension campaigns are organized in the Climate Safe Pensions Network and ramping up efforts there. Definitely the Harvard gives a boost to those, not only because of the size of its endowment of $42 billion, which actually dwarfs many of these pension funds in terms of assets under management, but also because, as I said earlier, with Harvard moving, the status quo and the mainstream have shifted as well. And so the remaining excuses for not divesting or pursuing divestment, I think, have virtually been eliminated at this point. Also want to mention that there are a number of cities that are organized together in the C40 Divest-Invest Forum who are collaborating and supporting each other on their own divestment journeys, including a number of cities in the Global South. And there is a upswell of movement in the Global South around divestment and pursuing climate justice and investments in renewables. Shout outs to Cape Town and Durban, for example. And I'm going to turn it over to Tomas as well to speak about a lot of the faith organizations who are moving on divestment in the Global South in particular.
Sure, yeah, indeed. There is a major announcement being planned for October 26th, a joint announcement. So yeah, many cities and universities and faith institutions and many others. So basically save the date for that. And yeah, on our side, we're hoping there will be several dozens of Catholic institutions joining in. Hopefully we'll get Boston College there. We're partnering with the Catholic Divestment Network, a network of students in Catholic universities that are working on divestment in their campuses. So yeah, we expect a groundswell, and needless, I would say across North and South, it's beautiful to see how much, just to mention, for example, in the Philippines, there's, and it's, the divestment campaign is kind of growing in locations like that one. They're going after the local banks as well and targeting coal. So all kind of beautiful action, popping up in all corners of the globe. So stay tuned for more.
Great, thanks so much, Tomas. I want to just give another opportunity to journalists to self-identify themselves using the raise hand function or the Q&A button on the screen. We have a number of other questions. I don't think they're from journalists, but I want to give priority to journalists right now. And then because we have a little bit of extra time, we'll try to answer some of the additional questions from some of the other attendees. So last chance for journalists to raise your hand or click the Q&A button. And then I'll turn it over to a couple of questions, which I'll read out loud. Okay, great, thank you. There's a question from Valerie. She asks, does anyone have any insights on working towards divestment at state colleges and universities as opposed to private universities? Any folks want to weigh in on that? I'll just note for Valerie's sake that one of the largest public university systems in the world, the University of California system, completed divestment from fossil fuels last year. And that was quite a groundbreaking announcement, not only because of the extensive system that is the U of California system, but also because of the size of the endowment, which also included divestment of the faculty pension fund under that system. So we are seeing progress and momentum not only at private universities and colleges, but also at public institutions as well. Many of those public institutions don't have large endowments like Harvard, but do manage funds that are significant. And there's a lot of action happening on campuses across North America to get those public institutions divested, both in Canada and in the United States as well. Great organization called divested.org, if folks want to check it out, who are organizing and supporting students on campus at many of those institutions. And we can put the URL for that organization in the chat.
Yeah, I can just add also that there's so many tactics available to folks trying to pressure institutions. There's no one size fits all approach for divestment, but there are like some incredible resources and like tried and true per se strategies out there that you can definitely draw on. So I would definitely recommend checking out the complaint option if you're working with an intransigent administration. Filing a legal complaint really can put them on notice, in addition to advancing a strategy that might have national implications. If any single state's attorney general really seriously takes up one of these complaints saying, fossil fuel investments are illegal, that could have ripple effects. But the power of merely filing a complaint is so evident in the case of Harvard. And already we've seen students at Boston College, at University of Wisconsin-Madison, also filing complaints. And there are a lot of links in the pipeline, to use that phrase for fun. But also you can find in this guide, which hopefully will go into the general chat, a whole list of like other complementary legal and non-legal strategies that you might look into using for divestment, as well as some resources for exploring the state of public colleges and endowments. Some of those resources are not available at private universities, where there can be a lot more obscuring of information and inability to use things like freedom of information requests. So there's definitely a lot of resources to take advantage of. I think just look through like Divested, Divest-Invest, lots of great sites out there with more suggestions.
Yes, and just to add to all of that, just to say this has been a really important part of this work from the beginning. Some of the earliest divestments were in community colleges in places like California. Obviously, the UC system was enormous, but the University of Michigan, a few miles from the center of the planet's car industry, has divested. The University of Vermont, the University of Massachusetts, University of Washington was an early part of some of this work, the University of Hawaii, on and on and on. So people have done extraordinary work at public institutions, public and private. And just to kind of reiterate, there are also people who have done extraordinary work in places that may never divest. There's great work at the University of Texas, at the University of Oklahoma, on and on and on. And these serve to do the other function of these divestment campaigns, which is to just keep raising this question of climate change and the financial implications of it over and over and over again in front of everybody's face. This has proved to be not just a great tactic in terms of its impact on the fossil fuel industry, it's proved, because we've been able to have this fight in 10,000 places, the best possible educational effort about global warming in general. And just a real shout out to people who have pursued it doggedly, even in places where they know that the odds are against them.
Great, thank you, everybody. I think we're going to wrap it there. There's another couple of questions in the Q&A. We'll put written answers into that for folks who've asked questions. I do want to make sure that we have time to get to our three closing speakers, and obviously open up the chat for our 115 attendees to send celebratory and congratulatory messages. Please keep them polite. We will unfortunately have to shut the chat down if it becomes too much filled with off-topic or spam-like messages. But without further ado, I want to introduce Joyce Chaplin, who is the James Duncan Phillips Professor in History at the History Department at Harvard University, who specializes in environmental and climate history. She's a faculty organizer with Fossil Fuel Divest Harvard. Welcome, Joyce.
Thank you. Thank you. It's just such an honor to speak today on behalf of Harvard Faculty Divest, representing my colleagues who supported and continue to support the divestment movement. I'm one of the 6 faculty who organized this group back in 2014. At that point, the student group, Divest Harvard, was just a little over a year old. We 6 faculty organized to support them, to make clear that they weren't standing alone, that we stood with them, that we admired their work and we believed in them. We joined their efforts to urge Harvard's administration to divest, and we rallied our colleagues to join us. We started in 2014 by writing an open letter for which we got 93 signatures to President Drew Faust, urging divestment from the fossil fuel industry. Most recently, in academic year 2019 to 2020, we organized a series of presentations to the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, educating our colleagues about the fossil fuel industry, about the need to divest from it, and about the important history of Harvard of doing the right thing, using its place in the world in order to advocate a better world, as it had done by divesting from apartheid South Africa. To accompany this series of presentations, we wrote a white paper on Harvard's response to the climate crisis, in which we recommended divestment and decarbonization. And our efforts concluded in this campaign with a vote at a February 4th, 2020 meeting of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, a vote of 179 to 20 in favor of a motion urging the Harvard Corporation to divest from companies actively developing further reserves of fossil fuels and to subject all future investments to a process of decarbonization. So a majority of the faculty were convinced. Despite what the faculty group did, I want to say that we believe the students did the really essential work. We were a cheering section. We were very happy to do that. All of the heavy lifting was done by the students. We still stand in admiration of them. And I want finally to urge colleagues at other academic institutions to get involved. I think there's some idea that you have to have certain qualifications to be an activist about the climate crisis. You have to be a scientist who studies the climate, or maybe some expert in climate policy in order to make a stand. And I think the framing of climate change as a question about science has been very damaging in terms of public reception and understanding of what everyone needs to do, whoever they are. For the faculty divest group, we didn't come from specific fields that had expertise in that very narrow sense, not at least at first. So true, our original 6 organizers included an economist, though not one who studies the fossil fuel industry. We had one physician who worked on environment and health, though again, not in relation to climate change. And the rest of the 4 of us, I'm a historian of early America. We also had a scholar of romantic literature, a psychiatrist, and a classicist, an expert on ancient Rome. So we didn't support the divestment movement out of any kind of academic expertise. We did it because we worry about the kind of planet we're handing off to the next generation, the very students, the young people we teach. So that concern is the only qualification you need to have to fight the climate crisis. So I ask colleagues elsewhere, please step up. Again, my thanks to the organizers of this event for including Harvard Faculty Divest. It was an honor to represent my colleagues here. Thank you.
Thanks, Joyce, for your commentary. And obviously, thank you so much for you and your fellow colleagues' efforts in this. The faculty organizing was a key strategic plank in getting to this day and this big announcement. Speaking of another strategy of organizing, I'm going to turn it over now to Anna Santarelli, who's an outdoor and classroom educator and organizer with the Fossil Fuel Divest Harvard Alumni Campaign. Welcome, Anna.
Hi, everyone. It's amazing to be here and be among people who have had such a profound impact on this movement, so thank you. Whatever Harvard wants to call it, this is divestment. And as alumni, we're so thrilled and energized that Harvard finally decided to stop supporting the fossil fuel economy through its endowment. Even though the university strategically chose to not acknowledge the campaign in their announcement, this is a huge win for us, especially for the students. The relentless dedication that they put into this campaign year after year has been inspiring. And we as alumni, we're so impressed to see their resilience and flexibility in the face of COVID and the work that they particularly put in most recently into filing the legal complaint against the Massachusetts Attorney General with Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey. As alumni, we were thrilled to see this announcement, and it's been so heartening to see on our listserv the emails that have streamed in from folks of all different class years celebrating this massive accomplishment. I think on a personal level, I was definitely shocked to finally see Harvard announce its plan to divest. I first became involved in the campaign in 2014 as an undergrad when I attended one of the first barricades of Massachusetts Hall, the office of then President Chu Faust. It was a very dismal, gray, cold Boston spring day. I had at least 4 coats on and 2 pairs of pants. And when I got to Mass Hall to support the students who were risking arrest, I remember thinking, where is everyone? At that hour of the morning, we had a group of maybe 20 people out of the 14,000 undergrad and graduate students. And as an American history major, I had studied instances of student activism like the Vietnam War protests. So I remember thinking that morning, if this were the 60s and 70s, everyone would be here. In hindsight, I probably shouldn't have judged the political involvement of our campus based on whether they decided to get out of bed at 6 a.m. on a freezing Boston spring day. However, I think the experience for me was a very pivotal moment because it embedded in me a desire to definitely get more involved in the campaign, to become more politically active in general, and also to not be one of those people who didn't show up. And since then, it's been awesome seeing people show up for this campaign. I think seeing students year after year take up the torch and continue this campaign. And also, since we sort of rebooted the campaign in 2019, seeing just how many alumni from all different years expressing interest in joining us, providing expertise or at least just general willingness to work on internal political education, op-ed writing, petition writing, student mentoring, building relationships with other campaigns like the Alumni Prison Divestment Campaign, hosting events, and much more than that. And because people have continued to show up for this, this is why we were ultimately successful. And our campaign, just like the students, our campaign is not stopping. We definitely have more work to do. Remember, they have just committed to divestment. The endowment has not been fully divested. Second, just because Harvard has committed to divesting from fossil fuels doesn't mean that we have a squeaky clean endowment. There's so much more that we're invested in that's hurting our present day society. And I think it's important that we work with other university divestment campaigns. And as Ilana was talking about, there's a lot of opportunities to expose the ways that Harvard is still entangled in the fossil fuel industry, such as receiving money for research from them. And finally, I want to emphasize how important it is for alumni to engage in organizing and holding our universities accountable, whether that's in relation to climate justice, racial justice, economic justice, or otherwise. This is how alumni really should be coming together. I think so often we are organized to network or be fundraised, and those ways are often perpetuating systems of power by contributing to Harvard's gain or our own personal gain. And what if we came together more instead to disrupt these systems of power? I think being a part of this campaign has shown me how powerful an exercise it has been in building community through shared values, through close collaboration, and really a deep desire for change. And we're meeting this weekend to see what our next steps are. And I'm so excited to come together with other members of this campaign to talk through what's next for us. So thank you.
Thanks, Anna, and thank you so much to you and your fellow alumni for your contributions to this campaign. Clearly, alumni organizing, including the Harvard Forward campaign, extremely important to success. I'm going to turn it now over to another alumni of Harvard and our final speaker today. His name is Ted Hamilton. He's the co-founder of the Climate Defense Project, and a nonprofit that it provides legal resources to the climate justice movement. Welcome, Ted.
Thank you. And it's really great to be with all of you after so many years. And it's nice to see some old faces back from those early days of the campaign when I was in law school at Harvard and we were pushing this fight. I want to speak a little bit about the complaint strategy, the legal complaint that a few speakers have already mentioned, how we got that together, and how other campaigns might take advantage of this going forward. So coming out of law school and starting a legal nonprofit, those of us who've been involved in the divestment movement, we're trying to think of another way to open up pressure on Harvard and other schools. And as Ilana kind of described earlier, there are some laws on the books in every state that give us what seems to be a pretty strong argument that investments in fossil fuels are not only immoral, but also illegal. This is called the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act. And basically what it describes is how directors of nonprofit institutions are supposed to manage their money. Now, we all know that institutions like Harvard and other universities, most of which are nonprofits, have a moral duty to their communities and to their students. And so they shouldn't just be investing purely for profit. That's pretty much exactly what this law describes. It lays out fiduciary duties, which Tom also described a little bit earlier. These are things that boards of directors, board of trustees have to abide by to ensure that they're being loyal to their institutions. Now, what makes this particular law compelling for divestment advocates is there is a requirement that in investing, when making investment decisions with an endowment or nonprofit assets, these fiduciaries, these managers, need to consider the charitable purposes of the institution. Again, this means they can't purely be seeking profit. And any university, any nonprofit institution is going to have charitable purposes that are in direct contradiction to investing in fossil fuels, whether that's educating the youth because of the fossil fuel industry's scientific misinformation campaigns, looking after its own physical property because of risks from sea level rise and other climate change harms. And more generally, every university, every nonprofit has a mission to serve the public in a very broad sense. That's why they're nonprofits. They don't have to pay taxes. So what we decided to do with the students at Harvard, and we've already filed some other complaints, namely Boston College and Cornell and University of Wisconsin. We came together as a team, a group of lawyers and a group of students and alumni, and basically put together as much evidence as we could of this conflict between charitable purposes and investments in fossil fuel companies. Compiled a really enormous document, something on the order of 40 pages with lots of scientific studies, the history of activism at Harvard, the intransigence of the administration, and we submitted that to the Attorney General. So the tactic here is to collect all this information and pass it off to state authorities. Under these laws, the Attorney General generally is the person empowered to regulate nonprofits. So the complaint is essentially handing over evidence, asking them to open an investigation, and eventually to compel divestment. Where that strategy is at right now is not totally clear. So we've given these complaints to different states' attorneys general, and we are waiting to hear back. One thing we've learned is that this law has essentially never been used. So as obvious as what it says on paper might seem to be, as it applies to fossil fuel investments, no attorney generals, no other lawyers have basically used this strategy. So there's a lot of really, there's an exciting opportunity here to use a new legal tool, and we think some of these states are taking it seriously. Seems to be the case in Massachusetts. We've heard some good suggestions from the office that they certainly are investigating this. We think that it probably had an influence in the Harvard context, largely, as Ilana mentioned, because of some of the language in the president's statement about fiduciary duties. And one thing that's important to keep in mind here is, even if we don't get the result of an attorney general opening an investigation, compelling divestment, simply the fact of compiling this evidence, putting it out in the public, raising the specter of legal liability for these institutions can have a lot of influence. None of these managers want to be seen in the public as violators of the law. They don't want their donors to think that there's some legal uncertainty about the investment of their endowments. So besides the eventual legal result, this strategy can have a lot of use as an organizing tactic and a PR tactic. So going forward, we're definitely hoping this fall even to be filing several more of these complaints at different types of institutions across the country, public and private. The law is a little bit different in each state. So if any campaigns or organizers out there are interested in this, I would really urge you to get in touch with my organization, Climate Defense Project. Contact information is in the chat. And we're really excited to make this, not just something that pushes these institutions towards divestment, but creates new legal precedent to, establish that these are in fact illegal investments against the public interest.
Thank you, Ted, for your comments, and thank you for your contributions to the campaign. And thank you also for your openness to invite people to contact you particularly if they're organizing campaigns at nonprofit institutions. I hope that you get a flood of emails asking for support and for some help going forward. This concludes officially the event. I want to invite everybody with the chat function now open to share messages of congratulations and celebration. Hopefully soon we'll be able to celebrate all together in person and throw a big party, particularly for the leaders and organizers of this movement and campaign. It is without a doubt that this is a people-powered victory. It involved hundreds, if not thousands, of people to get to this point, and there is definitely more to come. Stay tuned, as many speakers said, for a big announcement on October 26th in the lead up to the COP26 Climate Summit. We've got some new big news to share, so stay tuned for that. Keep working. We will get there. And thank you so much for participating today. Thank you. Take care.